Welcome, everyone. Today is February 14th. It is Valentine's Day, guys. I just thought I'd send out a gentle reminder. This is the Legislative Oversight Committee, and today we are going to receive an update on the Real ID. We have the first two testifiers would be Emma Corey and John Harrington, the commissioner. Before we start, Ms. Corey, you are new to us. I want to welcome you. And if you could for us, maybe give us a little bit of your professional background and your current position, and what are your duties and responsibilities, just to kind of help the committee out a little bit.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair and members. It is an honor and a pleasure to be here today as your new DVS Director. I am still learning the business, but a little less than 6 months on the job, but certainly really honored to be doing the work of serving Minnesotans in this role. I've been with the state for about 22 years. Most of my career was at the DOT, but also started at the DNR, worked for Governor Dayton for 2 years, and then now at DPS. And so, of course, as the DVS Director, all things DVS. And so, of course, the three large program areas in DVS are driver services, where we're issuing identification cards, licenses, ID cards, and so much more. On the vehicle side, of course, it's registration of title and titles, and managing and auditing our dealers, and of course managing commerce with the trucking industry. And then support services is everything and that supports driver and vehicle. So those are our three large, so that would be our, I don't know if you are aware, but the Public Information Center, the call center at DVS, is the largest call center in Minnesota, and there, of course, we field calls, whether it's on the vehicle or on the driver's side. So that's a kind of a gist of the background, and of course, what I can commit to you as the DVS Director is probably three things, and one is that you will always get transparency from me. So kind of to be able to share with you what I know and I'm hearing. Two, I think very important, and I've tried to do that in my career, which is hard work towards shared outcomes. And third is to lead with heart. I think that's really important in the work that we do and the way we serve the citizens of our state.
Well, thank you very much, and welcome. We look forward to working with you. Before we start, Representative Hornstein, do you have anything that you would like to comment on?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I really appreciate the Department of Public Safety coming this morning. This is something that Senator Newman and I have discussed also with Representative Torkelson. It's a very important and urgent issue for the state and for our constituents, and so we'd like to get an update and see if there are, if there is a role for the legislature and both sides of the aisle to play. We have this in common. I think this is a bipartisan concern, and we appreciate your being here.
Thank you, Representative Hornstein. With that, we will get started. Members, I would ask that you hold questions until the testifiers have completed their testimony. And for everyone in the room, we have a deadline at 10 o'clock. And I would like to get through the presentation and have enough time for members to ask whatever questions that they may have. With that, I recognize Commissioner Harrington. If you would identify yourself for the record and proceed, please.
Thank you. Good morning. I am John Harrington. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Public Safety. And I want to thank you for a couple of different things before I launch into the actual slide deck itself. First off, I want to thank you for hosting this hearing. I got up this morning, and there is not a news channel in the Twin Cities area, I'm probably into Wisconsin and greater Minnesota, that is not covering a story about Real ID. This hearing will, in fact, prompt more Minnesotans to go down and sign up for their Real ID. And so this hearing is going to facilitate us moving forward in getting Real ID into the hands of all the Minnesotans that need it and who want it. Secondly, I want to thank you for the work we've been able to do together through last session as we began working through the Minlars cases. The impetus for many of the projects that DPS and DVS have undertaken have come from our conversations with the legislative body. They have been frank, they've been honest conversations. You have helped us understand concerns of the public, and based on that understanding, based on that shared idea of what does the public need and what does the public want, the Department of Public Safety and the Department of Vehicle Services, led by Emma Corey, I think are moving to make sure that the deputy registers, the auto dealers, and the general public are getting their needs met faster, better, and with greater heart than perhaps they had in the past. So I want to thank you for being our partner, and I want to thank you for, once again, getting us some free publicity, because we're going to pay for some publicity over the time of getting this done. But I'll take all the free stuff I can get. So the topic today is Real ID, and so in order to understand Real ID, I want to take us back a step before we jump into where we are right now. Real ID was birthed out of 9/11. It was based on the 9/11 Commission's recommendation that the federal government needed to set standards for identification, in particular identification that would allow people to get on airplanes. We all remember 9/11. We all remember the hijackings. We all remember that people were able to get on an airplane under fake credentials, and the federal government made the decision that we needed to do a better job of making sure the people that were flying above us were in fact the people that who said they gave us their name. It established a minimum security standard for states to issue driver's license and ID cards, and it prohibited federal agencies from accepting for TSA, for federal entry onto military bases and federal facilities, state-issued IDs that didn't meet Real ID standards. That took place in 2005. And the Federal Real ID Act really does hit, and I've had this conversation with TSA and with HSAs in the last couple of weeks. It's a statutory legislative deadline that's written into the legislation that says specifically the date that this all has to take place, and that date is October 1st of 2020. There is a conversation happening at the federal level about whether or not that date is in fact cast in stone, but as of today, as I sit here with you today, it is. There isn't any wiggle room, there's no and plus or minus a few days. It's cast into legislative stone that by October 1st, all states to get their citizens on an airplane must have Real ID compliant identification cards. A Real ID is in fact an enhanced driver's license or an ID card. And it really does, it validates, it says that the state has validated the credentials of the person possessing the card. In 2017, Real ID legislation was passed by the Minnesota legislature. It passed a Real ID bill, and it'll enable the state to comply with the federal regulations. It directed DPS and DVS to make Real ID compliant driver's license available by the following year. In October 1st of 2018, the Department of Public Safety began rolling out the first of the Real IDs. They were able to apply for Real ID compliant cards in October of 2018. And we knew that they were going to have a window of about 2 years before that would absolutely be required. So if they hadn't applied in 2018, they could still get on an airplane up until this coming October. But we know that this October is coming, and since I have been in the chair over the Department of Public Safety, we have been tracking and our movement toward making sure that all Minnesotans that need and want Real ID will be able to get one. Minnesota offers 3 different identification options. We have the standard driver's license that everybody that grew up in Minnesota pretty much gets. So you get your driver's license. It allows you to drive on the states and roads of the state of Minnesota. It has been used as an identification card for virtually everything else up until this law. We After 2017, 2018, began issuing 2 other forms of identification, Real ID and an enhanced DL. All 3 of them are driver's licenses. All 3 of them will serve as identification. And with some modifications, all 3 of them will get you where you want to go. But there are certain rules of the road that we have to actually live with. Those rules of the road involve whether or not you're going to carry 2 forms of identification or simply 1. If you're willing to carry your passport with you or a passport card with you or a global entry card with you and your driver's license, you'll still be able to get on a plane in October. What we've heard is that there are a lot of people that do that. In fact, one of the questions I've asked the Department of State is, can they give me a database that says, tell me who's got passports, so I can compare that with those people that have got driver's licenses, and I can basically say, these people can get by without this. There's not a crisis for them to be able to get on a plane on October 1st. If they've got the passport and it's going to be a legal passport and they've got their driver's license, we can work around that. And we've heard different numbers. The Department of State has not been able to give me that database. I don't know that the Department of State and the lawyers that are going to be involved in that will allow them to give me that database. But we're going to keep asking, because I think it really would help us have a better understanding of what is the baseline for Minnesota. For how many Minnesotans really have to have this, and how many people will it be a nice to have? What is a real ID? The easiest way for you to pick out what a real ID from the other IDs, and we have mock-ups in the back of the room, is a gold star up in the corner of the ID. That is one of the marks of that it is, in fact, a real ID. It looks the same as a standard driver's license except for that gold star. But in order to get that gold star, as we all remember from our education days, it requires you to provide more documentation than we would require for a standard driver's license. For example, you need to be able to prove your identity, date of birth, and legal presence in the United States. You have to basically show us your Social Security number, and you have to prove current residency in Minnesota. So you need documentation to be able to get those things done. So what do you need? You need a birth certificate. You need a Social Security card. You need a utility bill or something that shows that you actually have an address here in Minnesota. And most people are finding it sometimes a bit challenging to get all 3 of those documents in the fashion that they look like original source documents. So, for example, I have a conversation with lots of my community folks that talk about they got their Social Security card. They have it in their wallet, which I'm not sure is the best plan, but they laminated it so that it wouldn't get ruined if their wallet fell in the water or fell in the wash or fell out in the snow. Well, a laminated Social Security card is not considered an original, untampered with Social Security card. So what do you do if you've already laminated? Unlaminating it's not really a great option. So what are you going to do with that? You're going to have to go back and apply to Social Security to get a duplicate unlaminated Social Security card. That takes time. A number of people talked to me about their birth certificate, the birth certificate they brought with them to the DL's office. It's a birth certificate, and it's got either their baby's picture or it's got the little footprints that the hospital puts on that replica birth certificate. It's a great parent collector item. I've got a bunch of them for my 7 kids. But it's not the original it's not the original signed and sealed birth certificate. And so DLs, others have been told that's not the original document, and therefore it's not sufficient for this purpose. We believe that we need to work with both the deputy registers and with TSA folks and HSA folks to talk about why is a laminated Social Security card not a Social Security card, and why is a birth certificate that in all other regards appears to be untampered with isn't a birth certificate that could be successfully used at this point. But that's a conversation we need to continue to have, because at this stage we have not been given permission to accept them in those forms. What's an enhanced driver's license? This caused a lot of confusion, and I was amazed at how many people that I talked to, especially folks of my generation, said, well, they went to the deputy register. Their intent was to get this new identification card, and so they looked at the list of options. They were pretty sure, okay, standard wasn't what they wanted. Real sounded okay, but enhanced, now that sounded much better. And so a lot of them went through the trouble of getting an enhanced driver's license. And I asked them this question typically: were you planning to drive into Canada or Mexico? They look at me like I'm nuts. They say, no, that wasn't. That's really what enhanced driver's licenses are for, is to allow you to cross a border driving. Now, it is sufficient to get on a plane. It does pass all of the same requisites that Real ID requires. So it's absolutely sufficient for all of the purposes of Real ID, but it does require even more documentation than the Real ID does, and it has a chip in the enhanced ID, which makes it a different card to manufacture and produce. It also is far more subject, if it gets bent or damaged, to being unusable and needing to be replaced. So, as I said, enhanced IDs are Real ID compliant. They're acceptable for all the federal purposes. They're also acceptable for border crossing. And so if you're regularly fishing in Canada, this might be a great idea for you. If all you really want to do is be able to get on a plane to go down to Florida to see grandma, not necessary. DVS anticipates continued confusion between Real ID and EDLs. We are trying diligently to have this conversation. I've been going out to senior citizen centers to have this conversation, because that seems to be one of the places where there's a lot of the confusion. So we've been trying to make sure that people understand that. But currently, our statute prohibits a Real ID compliant marker on the credential. So we have some issues there as to how will we make sure that people understand whether they have an enhanced ID or enhanced DL or a Real ID. This is a standard driver's license, and as I said, the standard driver's license gets you to drive, and if you have a passport or passport card, it will get you on a plane on October 1st. So it is not worthless. It is simply going to require you to have a secondary piece of identification with you in order to be able to do the same thing. I'm really hopeful that we will be able to work something out with state to try and get this so that we can understand that DL passport combination. Standard driver's license, as I said, can be used for federal purposes, including boarding domestic flights until October 1st. It's marked not for federal identification, but it's acceptable for driving and other identification purposes now and after October 1st. Transportation Security Administration, as we've been conversating with them regularly, will accept other forms of identification. And as I said, a valid passport, U.S. military ID will allow you to fly within the United States. If you're traveling domestically, you can use your passport to verify your identity instead of a Real ID compliant card. If you're traveling internationally, you've got to have a passport anyway. So for those folks that are traveling internationally, passport's a no-brainer. And the question that I've been asked by many people is, well, if I have a passport, do I really need to go out and pay the expense and do the extra work of getting a Real ID? And the answer to them is no. I don't believe that you need to do that, but you need to have this in the back of your mind. If you have to fly to grandma's house on a Saturday and your passport's in your safety deposit box and the bank's not going to open for you on that Saturday, after October 1st, you're likely to be stuck. So having the Real ID has some real practical advantages in terms of convenience and the certainty that you will have what you need when you need to get on a plane. 37.5% of Minnesotans have a passport. That's the ballpark number that we've been able to get to so far. In theory, and this is at this point, since I don't have a good database to work from, that means that with the people that have already applied for enhanced and Real ID, we're at slightly over 50% of Minnesotans who will be able to get on a plane on October 1st, as long as they have either dual identification or the Real ID. We believe that Minnesotans are going to want the convenience and the certainty that Real ID or an enhanced DL provides them, and that's part of why we have been really working hard to get the message out to everybody that this is an option and that they should be working on stepping up now in February, rather than waiting to the last minute. One of the ideas I had was we should set up a booth at the state fair so that everybody, as they walk through the state fair, we could process them for Real ID. Until I realized that the turnaround time for producing the Real ID from the time of the Minnesota get-together wouldn't get us to October 1st in a timely fashion. Currently, 4.1 million Minnesotans have a valid Minnesota standard driver's license or an ID card. We have 33,000 who have a valid Real ID, and another 259,000, almost 260,000, that have an enhanced driver's license. That amounts to about 12.5% of Minnesotans that have either Real ID compliant cards. That number has been going up, and it's been going up pretty well. But I will tell you, as a Catholic school kid, that my math tells me that the rate that we're processing these right now will not get us to where we need to get to. About 47% of the people that are applying for new or renewed driver's licenses this time are applying for Real ID compliant cards. 47% sounded really good when I looked at it on the screen initially, until I realized that what that translates to is about 19,000 Minnesotans per week getting Real ID. We have 33 weeks between now and when Real ID comes into force, and 19,000 times 33 weeks doesn't get me anywhere close to the other 48% of Minnesotans that neither have a passport or currently have a Real ID. And so we still have to make a push on this. We cannot relax. We cannot take our foot off the gas pedal. We have to keep pushing this in order to make sure that my worst case scenario is October 1st or right after that when MEA is going up. This is my image of this. Mom, dad, and grandma are at the airport getting ready to go down to the happiest place on the earth, and they walk up and they don't have Real ID. That's not going to be acceptable. That's not going to be well received. And I don't want to see the faces of crying children who can't get on an airplane because mom and dad waited too long to get their Real ID. As I said, we're processing an enormous volume of applications even as we speak, but we need to double or triple that volume if we are to really make our deadline. Working to make Real ID, making Minnesota Real ID ready, we have been pushing the advertising. And once again, thank you for this morning, because I think it's going to spur some more people to get in that line. We have a one-stop website for Real ID information and resources. That has really been very well received. Initially, I got lots of complaints from folks about saying they had to wait in line, they didn't know what they really needed, things along that lines. What we have really been pushing is go to the website. Pre-do as much as you possibly can, and then when you do come to the deputy register or you come to one of our stations, you'll be well prepared. It'll be a one-time visit, and it won't be these horror stories of I stood in line, I got to the front and was told that I had the wrong birth certificate or I had the laminated Social Security card and I had to go back, get the stuff, and then come back and wait in line again. We have been pushing this out through social media. We've had well over 1.5 million page views. So we have been pushing this through those vehicles. We've held news conferences out at the airport. We've had them with TSA. We're making sure that we're pushing on this, that TSA is pushing on this, that Homeland Security is pushing on this. We are trying to make sure that all of our partners are in fact pushing on this. I have reached out to the rest of the state cabinet to ask them to make sure that all Minnesota employees are encouraged to get their Real ID as early as possible. We reached out to General Jensen asking to make sure, even though they've got military ID cards, that the National Guard folks, which is a huge body, have their Real ID cards. We are doing news releases, really it seems like on almost a daily basis. There have been 80+ news stories that have happened since we began this launch in September. As I said, we're doing social media posts. We've got signage at the airports. We've got signage at the DVS exam stations. We've got signage at the deputy registers, DL offices, and we're looking for even more places where we can put signage. A creative idea that one of the members of your panel helped support was the idea that coming soon to the Minnesota State, to the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport, there will be a kiosk where Real ID will be available, because we all know if we do the 2 to 3 hour get there ahead of time and we get through security, there's time to be done there. There's time to work through some of this paperwork. At least there's time for us to do the education. And so we're working right now to have a kiosk at the airport where people that are waiting for their flight will be able to work through some of the details about Real ID. We are also looking at digital options on Real ID because I had a conversation with one of our civic leaders last night. He says, I haven't had a physical paper bill in years. I don't have a bill. I don't keep all my documents are now digital. They're all on my phone or they're on my computer. And now what you want me to do is to bring physical paper to a deputy registrar's office, which means I either have to go someplace and print it, which is still not the original document, and why is my digital information not acceptable? We're trying to work through a way of vetting the digital information so that it might be acceptable. And if we can get the feds to agree that it's acceptable, then we can turn the switch on here to allow the millennials who probably have more stuff on their phones than they have in a safety deposit box to be able to use their digital information to get Real ID also. Processing times are absolutely one of our concerns. DVS updates our current processing times on a weekly basis, and I hear from people regularly that they track how fast we're turning Real ID around. As of February 12th, a couple days before Valentine's Day, standard applications we were processing back from January 14th, Real ID applications from December 27th, enhanced ID, or enhanced driver's license applications back to December 19th. We recognize that those times have lagged, and that in order to meet those times, what we have done is we have taken on voluntary overtime. We have looked at trying to figure out ways to get additional DVS staff so that we can process more applications. We're looking, as I said, at technological fixes. So we're trying to make sure of all of those things, and we're working through that website and that pre-application process because we really do believe that when they use the process the way we've set it up, their wait time is going to be very, very minimal, and it will reduce our lag time in terms of how fast we can actually produce the Real IDs. I'm now going to turn this over to Director Corey because we really do, there's some urgency to this because of the October 1st deadline, and I'm going to turn it over to McCory now to talk about what are some of those issues that keep her up at night.
Thank you, Commissioner. Director Corey.
Thank you,
Please
Commissioner.
identify yourself for the record and then
Yes,
proceed.
this is Emma Corey, DVS Director. Chair and members, again, one of the first pieces that I want to start with is DVS, my team, our commitment to you and to all Minnesotans is that on October 1st, 2020, not one Minnesotan can say, I did not know about Real ID. That is my commitment to you. And what I mean by that is we are working hard and tirelessly to get the word out to not just the metro, but every corner. And our partners and an extension of us and the deputy registrars are helping us to do that. So when it comes to October 1st, if a Minnesotan chose not to, was fine with using their military card or carrying their passport, that is a choice that they made. But if they did not know, then we failed. And we, as a commissioner and myself, are committed not to let that happen. Another important thing in the last few months that we have been working hard with our staff, with our stakeholders, and with our partners is being very, very deliberate about a job, I would call it a cross-training workforce model in DVS. And so with our staff, we are making sure that those that issue driver's licenses, those that issue titles, and sometimes even those that answer the phone are cross-trained so that we can leverage our staff based on the peaks and valleys and where the pressures are. So at the current time, we have 14 title issuers in processing Real ID since December. We have 23 new staff from our Public Information Center that, as part of their onboarding and training process, are part of the time issuing titles, the simplest of titles. So we are being very deliberate about being able to leverage a small staff to do all the different things that DVS is expected to do over the course of the year. This model works really, really well at most times. What we have right now is the perfect storm that we are going into between now and the end of this year. I call it that because, of course, as you know, we have our VTRS system that is going to roll out on November 16th, 2020. Real ID goes live October 1st, 2020. We have a national election. Very often, address changes are coming in because of that. And then finally, we have a summer between now and the end of the year. Summer is a peak time when folks want to go out there and get their road test. Our exam stations will be under pressure. Our CSS, our customer service clerks are going to be pressed at our counters. And then, of course, our staff are going to be pushed to be able to process. Because right now, what is happening is we are getting more in than we can process. And so the element also that's added here is the fact that we do not know how many are going to come in between now and October 1st. So that throws an element of uncertainty, but again, we are planning based on the trend that we are already seeing. So again, as we go forward, certainly a perfect storm. We are doing what we can do best, but especially with VTRS rolling out on November 16th, I absolutely cannot take my vehicle people and deploy them like I am right now for Real ID. They will need to be where they are. Our phone agents will need to be where they are. Our issuing staff will need to be where they are. And they are going, we are working with our AFSCME union. As I said, we are fortunate to have a wonderful relationship with them where we have been able to have all of our staff work bend over backwards Saturdays and Sundays but we've tried to keep it to voluntary and not mandatory. I absolutely do not want to have to go to mandatory overtime for my staff who are already working very, very hard. As we go forward, again, I have been heartened. I have been very encouraged. Assistant Commissioner O'Hearn, Assistant Commissioner A.C. Lino and Deputy Commissioner O'Hearn, as well as our Legislative Director, Katie, have all talked about how you, as members of this committee, have all personally said, how can we help? You tell us there's a problem, how can we help? I ask you to tell your constituents, to remind your constituents to do what they can to help us help them. There was a clear parallel in the fall of last year when we had such a backlog on road tests. We asked you, and we asked our DRs, through our public announcements, we tried to tell the public, come prepared. When we have to plan for maybe 2 retests for you, that's one thing. But if I have to plan for 6 retests because you did not come prepared, that is pushing me to an unsustainable level of capacity. So come prepared and do not be a no-show. That was what we said for the road tests. Because again, the number of no-shows and as well as the coming unprepared, and 3, 4, 5, 6 tests pushes the capacity. The parallel here for Real ID, again, is we are asking you to tell folks to come early. Come early and allow us to serve you. Come prepared. We have been learning, we have been having conversations with our stakeholders and especially our deputy registrars on what are they seeing at the counters? What are the missteps? What can we help with? Our communications, Bruce Gordon has been doing an amazing job. We said, the best of us will look at that list and our eyes glaze over, with going down just a few with small print on what you need. Let's do a visual. He delivered for me, and we have visual documents, both in paper as well as our video, that says 1, 2, 3. You need an identity document, you need a social security document, number document, and then you need 2 residency documents. So we are doing what we can to simplify it. I absolutely agree that there is still pain points. There are still pain points in the system, but when we think about the fact that we are putting that in our major languages, both the video as well as the paper copies, we're doing some outreach, we expect to really go to the people this summer. Every one of our communities has a festival or an event in the summer. We hope to meet people where they are and tell them about Real ID. And so the way you can help us in a big way, we'll talk a little bit about potential legislation in a minute here, but most importantly, communicate to your constituents. The resources are on realid.dps.mn.gov. Let them know that they can look up. How often do you get a call that says, I went in 3 weeks ago, I don't know where my license is? They can go in and on our website and look up the status of their license. So the address is right there. Of course, we will make sure this PowerPoint is with you and your staff. But if you put a permit number or a license number in, it will tell you under review, more information needed, has been mailed. So kind of it gives them, and it'll also tell you when we are processing for. So if you roughly know that you came in the middle of December, my info on there will tell you we are currently processing Real IDs for December 12th or December 14th. So again, a great resource there. If we go forward again to look at the Real ID documents that are out there. So I want to talk about the pre-application actually for a minute. So the pre-application has been vetted with our deputy registrars. I am a firm believer that our exam station staff and our deputy registrars are seeing the real-time issues. There are specific fast changes in the system, in the fast DS system, that clarify the requirements, and so we have made 4 changes very recently on recommendation from our deputy registrars that says, you might think it seems, that it's pretty clear, but it is important because if you got your passport, say, 5 years ago or 10 years ago and have not looked at it, you might open it now to get your Real ID and find that it's expired. It has to be an unexpired passport for it to work as a document that will serve you in this purpose. So saying that it's unexpired, saying that the pay stub has to have the name, address, and phone number of your employer. Again, my favorite story on my time at the Real ID, and this was before I was in the job, but a state of Minnesota pay stub will not serve as a document that you can use to be able to get your Real ID because it doesn't have all 3 parts of the information that's required. And we are the largest employer in the state. So there are certainly some pain points. There is certainly some language as well that we can consider and look at. So let's go to the next one. And in this one, again, when we talk about the additional documents required, I won't go into it in a lot of detail because Commissioner has done that too, but the point that you want to encourage folks, if they went into the pre-app even 3 months ago and were frustrated, ask them to please give us a try again, because we continuously work with FAST to make some changes and efficiencies. We continuously hear from our deputy registrars and update our FAQs and our frequently asked questions. And so pre-application, if you can tell your constituents as we are, pre-apply, 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 because that will also give them that first heads up of whether they are missing a document. And then secondly, of course, it will print out their reminder saying, make sure you're taking certified copies of this. Current address information will be that reminder. So that is probably the most important one, but we'll go into a couple of the legislative, verbiage changes, statute verbiage changes that might really, really help. You have heard, folks, it's certainly more, it is certainly harder for us women to get a real ID. And so if you, if you changed your name at marriage, if you have, if you have documents that have both names, or if you were married twice, so you had a divorce and, and are back to your maiden name, all of those things can be a daunting task for folks. And so I want to highlight, when we continue to hear that, our Driver Services Director, Andrea Fassbender, took on the initiative to work both with the Department of Homeland Security as well as Custom Border Protection to get a write-off from them to allow us to make this easier for Minnesota women. And what we can do now is we can counsel our clients, our customers, Minnesotans, as long as they have 3 documents with the same name, they've got the 4 documents rather, so the identity, the social security, and the two residency documents in the same name, we will not require anything else from them. And so that, I think, was a major step in the right direction. It was responding to a real-time problem, and it was a show of partnership between us at the office, hearing what the field was telling us and what you were telling us. And so, like that, we continue to make edits on a daily basis to the interface that we have. If you have looked at our website lately, I hope you will be impressed, because I think we have done an amazing job just even since in the last 3 to 4 months. So when we go into this, there is Minnesota, Commissioner, just one back, yes. On this, the Minnesota there is a federal statute and a federal requirement for the Real ID Act, and then there is a Minnesota state statute. That is within your power. And these are all addressing Minnesota statutes. So, as you know, the state statute can be stricter, but it can also be the pain point that our clients are telling us, our customers are telling us. The utility bill cannot have 2 unrelated names. Federal requirement does not require that. It says you can use a utility bill. It does not, however, say you cannot have 2 required unrelated names. That's a Minnesota statute. If that was changed, roommates would be very, very thankful to you, as well as couples that have chosen to keep their names and don't care to tell you that they are married or prove to you that they are married. And so, that is an important and potential major game changer for some of our folks. Utility bill must be 90 days old. Commissioner talked about we do a lot of things online. When you think about the 90 days old, how often will you pick something? And it could certainly be 91 days old, and now we send you back unfortunately, because we are trying to stay true to both federal and state statutes. Title must be issued within 12 months. How many of us have a car that's about 10 years old or more? And so that title being issued in the last 12 months is, that's asking more than usually folks. It then becomes a document they cannot use, so removing the 12 months. Pay stubs must contain an employer phone number. Well, maybe an address, but also a phone number. I think that we are holding Real ID to the EDL standards as well here. And that is where there might be some room for change. Insurance policy must be issued in the last 90 days. Again, how often we do not, we do not accept insurance cards. Those are all things that can make it easier, make it that one step. Right now, we're assuming as about 15% of our people go back, at least for a second trip. We are not treating Minnesotans the greatest because there are some barriers here that you might be able to help us fix. Most customers do not have access to a canceled check. When we say canceled check in the day, the bank would perhaps send us a list of our canceled checks. Not anymore. And then a lot of folks like me will think a canceled check means, hey, I put void on there and I carry it and that's a good one. That's a voided check and not a canceled check. Catch me telling you across the counter that doesn't qualify. I got an irate customer now, and we have our deputy registrars that are dealing with that on a daily basis. And so these are folks, our staff, our DRs want to do anything they can to bend over backwards, not to have them need to make a second trip. And here we are needing to say that every time, I'm sorry, I can't take it. And so those are some things that we could address. And as we go forward again, what is the road ahead and what can we expect? I have to be, as I said, I committed to being transparent. At the current time, if we are close to, 46 days for Real ID, 56 days for enhanced ID, and 33 days for standard ID right now. In transparency, if we continue, and I have VTRS as a high priority to be on time, on budget, we will make that happen. I look at our partner and friend Rick King, who is helping us with the MSP Presence as well, that we will be on time, the project will be on time and on budget. And so as we go forward, I do anticipate if Minnesotans come out, the good news is that our communications are working. The not so good news is that our communications are working and people are coming in and those numbers will continue to increase. And if that continues to happen, I do anticipate that we will, in the next 2 months perhaps, go to a 90-day. And when we are even beyond that, I do anticipate going even up to 120 days. And so 120 days puts us as saying June 1st. If you are not in with your paperwork by June 1st, I cannot guarantee you that, and we will socialize that number soon here as we are looking at the trends every week. And so 120 days means June 1st. 90 days means July 1st. So everybody and all our literature, our PSAs are saying October 1st. However, this is a second date we are going to have to float so that folks know that that is the date by which they need to bring their information and submit it before actually getting that piece of identification in the mail. So again, we are working hard. I commit to you, my budget will not allow a higher level of overtime than I am doing right now, but we are working hard. You have my commitment. We will work hard towards that end to be able to say the latest that we possibly can to be able to get folks, Minnesotans ready, Real ID ready on October 1st. But again, we want to keep all of our other promises as well. I'll stop there and we can take some questions. Perhaps I am really excited about the MSP airport, and so I want to say a word of that. I know Commissioner talked about it, but March 2nd, we will have a working presence, a working office in MSP, thanks to Rick King. And so basically, right now, my team is working on both the logistics of setting up a space, and MSP and MAC have been gracious. Delta has been gracious. If you are flying between March 2nd, in fact, maybe earlier, between now and October 1st, you will see it on their monitors. You will see it in their collateral. You will see our materials out there along with our staff ready to issue. A week ago, I was returning from Canada, and I did my global entry interview at the airport and was approved. And so similarly, if they do the pre-app, we can put on there, if you're going to be flying in the next 3 months, you can bring A, B, C, and when you are past, because we will be past security, so doing it this side of security would not have been smart because everybody's running and rushing. We are on that side of security. So when you are ready to relax and perhaps have a drink, that's the time when you can you have the time on your hands to be able to get a Real ID instead. And so I'm very excited about that. Our team has been working really hard, and also we have talked with the MAC team and the Delta team about not just talking about DVS staff that will be representing Real ID, but creating ambassadors from MSP staff to be able to be ambassadors for Real ID. And so, our staff will provide them with a 101, Real ID 101. So whether it's it's a security guy or a baggage handler or counter staff, they are able to have the information on Real ID and point them in our direction. So excited about that. We are working with Ohio. Ohio is working, that is the first other state that is looking at a presence at the Columbus airport. I guess we might just beat them to it, but we are exchanging notes with them as well on how to do this right. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Director. We are I'm about ready to go to member questions, but before I do, Mr. Buna, perhaps you could come up to the testifying table. It's on. And I just, if you would identify yourself for the record and tell us with whom you are associated. I just want to ask for your input as to the current status of the program and if you have anything else that you wished to add, and then we'll go to member questions. Mr. Buna.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Ken Buna. I'm an associate partner with Fast Enterprises and the current project director for the Vitris system, and I was the project director when we did the Fastia system.
Can you give us an idea, Mr. Buna, as to the current status of the Real ID program? And have you got anything else that I just wanted to give you an opportunity to add to anything the commissioner or the director has stated with respect to Real ID?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The statistics that they have provided are generated out of our system on a daily basis. We ensure that they're accurate. We are looking at what we're calling the signatures of the applications that are in review to see if we can find ways of streamlining the process, anything that we can do to help the DPS staff that are reviewing these applications to speed it up. We are working very closely with the business unit based on their business rules to try and make this better and faster and more efficient for everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Buna. We'll go to questions now. I will start with Mr. King.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, I've got if it's okay, I have a couple of questions for each of the different folks, so if you'll bear with me, there's one or two here. To Commissioner Harrington or to the Director, what I'm curious about with the processing time and the backlog on the back end, a little more about the strategies to reduce that or at least maintain it. If I average it out, it's like, let's just say it's 60 days, it's 47 or 57, I think, depending on the type of document. But what's the strategy to be able to maintain that as we get through to the deadline? I heard you say overtime, but not mandatory overtime. What other strategies do you have in that regard?
Mm-hmm. I can certainly speak to that, Chair and members. One of the things that is an important piece, and our deputy registrars are recognizing them and recognizing it and are already responding. For example, if a deputy registrar office is a scanning office, that takes off 2 weeks of processing time for a real ID. And so Hennepin County, I want to give kudos to Hennepin County and our partner there, Nanglore, also the leader for MDRA, but they have just committed to becoming a completely going to scanning by April of this year. That will make a huge difference for us and how we can serve you and how we can serve Minnesota. So what we have chosen, and with your support, of course, to do is help our smaller, because not everyone is a Hennepin County. We have a small 2-person deputy registrar or a 1-person deputy registrar that cannot come to our meetings because that means closing shop. And so we're beginning to do even our trainings and our WebExes at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. so that they can, participate. But as we go forward, scanning offices will make all the difference. And we have, through the VTRS project and under your oversight, we are able to say that we will provide at least 1 scanner, so 1 scanner per deputy registrar. And that will get them into the business of scanning for, for transactions moving forward. And so that's one piece. The other piece that I think is really important here is for us to continue to press on. We have a robust communications plan, but I think really leveraging. Very recently, there was a PSA in partnership with our South St. Paul, DR Vint Lewis, as well as DVS and Comcast, because of which now that will have clear coverage across Minnesota. As I said, the metro might continue to now hear it, but what about the corners of our state? And so I understand now that we will have PSA announcements at every TV station across the state. So again, working on the communication channels, I think that being very important. A great idea from our communications team at DVS, we are going to reach out to the top 100 businesses in Minnesota, which will cover more than 2 million employees, encouraging them to have their employees be ready when they need to fly for work. And so we are reaching out to the top 100 businesses. We'll reach 2 million people to be able to get the word about Real ID out to business travelers. In the past 2 months, just December and January, December is our biggest month for renewal notices that go out. You and I both received that. If you received a renewal notice in December or January, I want to hear if you did not receive the Real ID insert, because 2 million have gone out in December and January that had a detailed Real ID insert, helping get the word out in a simple format. So there are a few of those things that we are doing. There are a couple things that I am working with FAST and Ken's team to help us learn from the experience of other states. It is very important for me as well as for you that we will never compromise the integrity of the document that we are issuing to Minnesotans. And so when we find the right places to be able to speed up a process without compromising the integrity of our process and the Real ID Act, we are actively looking right now at ways to be able to do that. We are also working with our DRs. They are pressured if, we have a complement of staff. If you have 4 staff and you lose 1 staff in the workplace right now, that is a pain point for folks to come on with the background check and the interview and all of those things. A DR that loses a staff might have 4 weeks of lag time and business lost if they are. So there are things that we are working on. Some have no answers, some do, some have half answers. I want to assure you that we are exploring all of those.
Mr. King, you have a follow-up?
Yes, please, if I may, Mr. Chair. And I've got a couple, so I'll just say be succinct as possible in the responses so everybody else can get a chance to. On the front end, there's still lines and waits and so forth at the deputy registrars. How many locations can do appointments?
So I asked this question of our DRs yesterday. My understanding at the current time, I am only hearing that Hennepin County absolutely, definitely does appointments. I asked the question, do you have a wild guess as in terms of how many? I'm hearing less than 10%, or maybe even less than, closer to 5% maybe.
Mr. King.
Thank you for that. I think there was a lot of conversation about the documentation and some good recommendations on slide 20 about some things that Minnesota appears to be more rigorous about documentation than federal requirements. I just note that one of my questions was going to be about that, but I don't think I need to ask that. Mr. Chair, if I might ask Mr. Boone one question, I'll be done.
Mr. King.
Mr. Boone, related to the very last point, I'm actually going to ask you two, I think, the very last point. Is there anything in the software, FAST software, that can facilitate more deputy registrars to have appointments? That would be the first question. The second one is, are there examples of other states where the FAST DS software is being used and things that would be helpful to us, including issues around documentation or something like that?
Mr. Boone.
Mr. Chair, I don't know of any other FAST state where the private entities use our software for appointments. We do have our exam stations, like the exam stations that are managed by DVS, allow for appointments. I don't know of anyone. I can certainly investigate that for you and get back to you for the states that do have both the public and the private entities issuing driver's licenses. As for the software, it's basically the business rules that we're applying is the big thing. Based on my experiences of a few of the places that I've worked at, I would suggest that Minnesota is likely the most strict interpretation of some of those requirements than other places are.
Thank you.
Representative Carlson.
A question of Ms. Corey, Director. You said that when you present your ID, you have to have, or your documentation, excuse me, it has to be the same. And so the various ones you're presenting, so I kind of perked up on that. I've been married 51 years. And I was going through, my wife was Carol Sue Moss when we got married. She got her driver's license right after we got married, change of address, and she became Carol Sue Carlson. In recent years, she is either Carol Moss Carlson, her maiden name in the middle, or sometimes she is Carol Sue Moss Carlson on some of her ID. In my case, I have kind of a dual heritage, Norwegian and Swedish, and there was a string of a number of young women born on the Norwegian side, and they were concerned about keeping my grandmother's maiden name alive. So on my birth certificate, I'm Lyndon Richard Selvig Carlson. I generally go by Lyndon R. Carlson or Lyndon Richard Carlson, and all my various IDs have these variations. I have a junior, so I've got some ID where I'm Lyndon R. Carlson Senior, including the blue book here at the legislature. And so basically I'm asking about same, and this is important. Way back when I applied for my first passport, because I generally go by Lyndon R. Carlson, I applied for a passport, sent the information into Chicago, got a letter back because I had my birth certificate accompanying them, and I very seldom use the Norwegian name Selvig. But they said there was a discrepancy between my birth certificate and my application because I filled it out. My school records are Lyndon R. or Lyndon Richard and so on. So I had to send it in again. And so now I have my driver's license. I pulled that out. I'm Lyndon R. Carlson. This is a passport that you can carry in your wallet. It's good for North America and the Caribbean. Because of the passport situation, on this one, I'm Lyndon Richard Selvig Carlson. My state ID, I'm Lyndon R. Carlson, and I could continue to go. I've got several variations in my wallet that I'm carrying today. So it goes back to what is the definition of same? That's my question. With a lot of
Absolutely,
background.
absolutely.
Director Corey, if you, as best you can, keep your answers somewhat limited. I have a number of members who wish to ask questions.
Sorry for my lengthy, Mr. Chairman.
That was interesting.
But it is an
heritage.
important question because with the passport people,
It is.
reinforced it exactly the way it was on the birth certificate.
Director
Representative
Corey.
Carlson, to keep that really short, I'm going to ask you to help us among all of those IDs to find 1, 1, and 2 that kind of match up to be able to help you.
Well, Mr. Chairman, just a quick
Representative
comment.
Carlson.
I got them out. I'm not sure I can find 3 without, I'll look for that. But I think you said something like to do my best. So if I'm in line and my best isn't good enough, what happens then?
Director Corey.
I know from hearing from our DRs and our staff that they have done whatever they can, so when they look at those, they are not going to look for differences, they are going to be looking for similarities. I have trust in the customer service of our DRs and our staff that they are going to try to find a way to make it work for you versus turn you away. So you are going to have a challenge. You are going to have a challenge, but I think when you think about names, there is possibly that they will be able to see where you might have an initial that they will work with versus requiring it exactly the same. So they will. My hope is they will help you. If there is an issue that we can help with, we certainly would want to entertain those at Town Square.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'll stop there because of the interest of the others, but I can see a situation where different staff people are going to enforce that differently. In my wallet, I could find 2 that were the same.
Yep.
I couldn't find 3.
Yep.
I might be able to dig around at home and find a 3rd one. But I think then that the message has to go out there
Yep.
with the language that you've used here, where you've said similarity and so on, so that they understand that there has to be some flexibility. Probably my wife's is more complicated than mine. in terms of finding different IDs, that the three would be the same. But I'll stop there,
Absolutely.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative, and that is a legitimate issue and a legitimate question. Thank you for bringing it forward. Chair Hornstein.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for your presentation. You know, to Representative Carlson's point, and, you know, Senator Dibble and my staff will tell you I'm not the best at technology and navigating things, but I did have a chance to go online and see your page, and it's very good. But my concern is that I think that when we look at, you know, the constituent mail that we're getting and some of the concerns that have been raised today, it really is about the ID and the forms of ID you need to bring in order to get the real ID. So on the left side on the website, there are frequently asked questions, but it's the what documents to bring answer is the 15th one down. And so I think that if you could make that more prominent,
Absolutely.
and you know, with some additional clarity that you've provided us, I think that would be helpful. Now, that was just more of a suggestion. My question is that knowing now that the real deadline for people to apply is sometime over the summer, maybe it's June 1st, July 1st, I mean, that is tomorrow, really. And so do you have any particular ask of the legislature beyond us communicating with our constituents, which I think we will, given the urgency and importance of this, you know, in this legislative session to you know, expedite this? Are there policies or staffing issues? I think it's really important because if there is an ask, we need to develop a bill and hear it in the next couple of weeks.
Commissioner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Representative Hornstein. On slide 20, we listed several statutes where the Minnesota legislature has inserted essentially enhanced ID requirements into the verbiage for real ID. And those statutes where the utility bill can't have two unrelated names, utility bill can't be over 90 days old, those are really enhanced ID issues that have been put into real ID. If those areas were relaxed rather quickly, it would allow for far easier and a more wide variety of documentation that would be acceptable by Minnesota deputy registers to accept for real ID. I think that would cut down some of the pain points there. We are open to a conversation about, you know, Emma talked about, you know, currently we're at voluntary overtime. We're looking at whatever resources we can possibly put together to try and make sure we have as much staff dedicated to this. Part of her whole piece about the perfect storm is that while we're doing VTRS and we're trying to make sure that all the people, and we had hearings this last year about people waiting for their driver's license tests, and we have real ID, we have been it's a shell game to some extent, certainly. I move people from here to here to here to here, and I keep trying to move them around to wherever the current pain point is. But at some point, when I moved people over to Ken's team to make sure that we had all of the right people doing the regression testing and all the subject matter experts to make sure that our next system that's going to go online is right, I pulled those people out of driver's license issuing, or I pulled them out of driver's testing stations. So any additional resources that are available in that area where I could replenish the people that are in the spots that had to be vacated would certainly, I think, help us in terms of moving this forward.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Torkelson.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Many of the things I've been thinking about have been addressed already. I think I will just at this point emphasize the fact that if we're going to make any changes in the legislature with these issues surrounding real ID or with the potential of changing registration fee requirements, we need to do that ASAP. If we delay this work, we threaten the fine work that Mr. Buna and his team are doing. If we delay the rollout of their new program, we are going to be that much longer dependent on an old program that is operating with crossed fingers, I guess is the best way to put it. The other concern I have is the concern about backlog. It seems to be building. We have a lot of folks that have submitted their applications, but they're for some reason on that backlog list. To Director Corey, how do you plan to deal with that backlog?
Director Corey.
Representative Torkelson, I certainly agree with you in terms of the backlog. When you look at the February 3rd to 7th, we're talking about 65,000 that are waiting in our queue to be issued for Real ID, 40,000 in our queue for EDL, 10,000 for standard. So again, what we are trying to do right now is find efficiencies within the system, leverage overtime, and then we are also looking at ways where we can look at how do we process these a bit quicker. We are looking at our scanning offices. We are looking at the scanning operation right in our shop. We have phone agents right now that have also been taking shifts with just scanning documents because right now they come into us as paper. And so we might even have a spot of time where we have mail that still has to be opened from the DR and scanned before our folks can process them. So we've got this assembly line that's going, and we are doing, we're bending over backwards, sir.
Senator Yazinski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have actually several technical questions, but in lieu of time, I'll beat on to the one that is most important to me. Is we've talked about all the documentation, what the deputy registers do for all these things, and I don't know which one do you want to answer this, maybe Director Corey, but for all the compensation that the deputy registers are getting for processing these, do you believe an $8 fee is appropriate for these deputy registers to be collecting for this process?
Director Corey.
Senator Jasinski, as I said, I'm still learning the business, and so the fee structure and things like that, I know that the service that our DRs give us is incredibly valuable to me. They are an extension of us. They are an extension. When I say we work to maintain the integrity of the documents that we issue, they are our partners in that. So in terms of value, they are invaluable to us. In terms of fees, I still am not familiar with the whole fee structure, but from my vantage point, you couldn't pay them enough.
Thank you, Mr. Then I will do one technical question as long as I have. So I have my regular driver's license here, and I was issued it in July of 2018. So at that time, the enhanced driver's license or the Real ID was not available. And this one expires in 2022, and I need to get it before October of 2020. So in the fee structure for this, for what it costs a Minnesotan, how do you compensate the 2 years that they're losing in that fee that they would have in their regular driver's license? How is that being compensated at the deputy registers? That's one of the big questions I get is, I just renewed mine, now I have to pay more. How does that balance out as far as what they're paying, what they would have paid, and what they have to pay because of the change?
Director Corey.
So again, Senator Jasinski, I'm not sure I got all of that, but I know that. So is it from the customer perspective, from a DR perspective? I'm not sure I understood the question.
From the customer's perspective.
So from a customer.
Senator Yazinski, your follow-up.
For the Minnesotan is their fee, what they're paying, not what the deputy register, what the fee to the living in Minnesota, what they're paying. Are they paying extra? Excuse me, because we're doing this early, like I said, mine expires in 2022, and I need to get mine in 2020. I'm basically losing 2 years off the license that I would have paid for. How is that being compensated to our Minnesotans?
So I hope, Senator Jasinski, that I'm answering your question, but the way I understand it, if if a Minnesotan wants to come in and be able to avail of the Real ID, and we want them to, they get the additional 4 years in addition to what they have left on their ID. So if you come in, you get your 2 years, when you pay your fee, but you maintain your 2 years and then get 4 years. So the next time you will renew will be 6 years.
Okay, those are the extent of the questions, members, that I have. And I want to thank the committee. We are on time.
Mr. Chair.
Representative Torkelson.
Not really a question, Mr. Chair, but I guess it is a question. I have information from staff that indicates that driver services is already $5 million in the hole. Is that a real number?
Director Corey?
That is not accurate. That's not accurate. So I know that we are running very tight, but that is not accurate. So I do have a budget report in here somewhere. But that statement is not accurate, Representative
I'm happy to hear that, Mr. Chair, but I think we need to keep a close eye on these
Yes,
numbers. We
that
don't
is
want
so
you to run
true.
out of money and be unable to provide the
Yes.
services.
I,
that are
you
needed.
know, again, in transparency, I am certainly nervous about my overtime budget. My mail bill comes in the end, and that's in the millions. My minute IT bill comes in the end, and that's in the millions, and it's higher this year. So I am very nervous as I approve overtime.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My understanding is that your balance is below your stated reserve, that it should be.
Representative Torkelson, we'll check to make sure what our numbers are. We have a significant number of vacancies that have not been able to fill, and so we will check, because I know we've been trying to balance out some salary savings against what we've been spending in overtime to try and keep everything at an even keel.
Representative Carl?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, could I maybe just temporarily put my hat on as Chair of Ways and Means? You know, we're going to get the forecast on the 28th, and then there's going to be a lot of discussion about a supplementary budget. The governor is probably working on that already. So as a follow-up to the previous question about the $5 million, I whispered over, maybe the follow-up should be, are you in the hole? By some number, maybe the $5 million wasn't accurate, and I think the recent comments now are that you are, to some degree, experiencing a deficit. And my point is that before we set those targets for a supplemental bill, we're going to need those numbers. And we all know this is a short legislative session. It's already been pointed out on other issues that we have to be prepared to move fairly quickly on any number of issues. And so I'm just talking now about the supplemental bill. And if, in fact, you are in deficit, we're going to need one to cover that somehow, either internally or with supplemental appropriation, and we'll need those numbers. So it's
Corey,
not really a
response?
question, but a comment.
Commissioner?
Senator Newman, we
Commissioner Harrington.
will make sure that that Representative Carlson and others get our financials. As I understand it, we are not in the hole at this time. I think the numbers that I've heard are, if we continued our burn rate at the current rate, we would be in the hole, because we are using overtime to try and fill some gaps that we don't have, but we have been trying to keep that balance with the salary savings. But my commitment to you is that we will, in short order, get you our financials, and if there are any issues in terms of deficit, we will be happy to have that conversation as we're having it with the governor as he prepares his supplemental budget.
Chair Harnstein, any closing comments or remarks?
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for helping to organize this meeting. And to the DPS and FAST, thank you for your testimony. I guess as we part here, I would just concur with Representative Torkelson's comments. If there is a role for the legislature, and it sounds like there may be, we would really need to move very quickly. And I think, again, really emphasizing the real deadline that you have, which is over the summer, I think really calls for even more than we're all collectively doing now to avoid the problems that you outlined. And then I also think, again, just making sure that there is a lot more clarity on, the documentation that our citizens need to get this. So those would be kind of my list coming out of this meeting, Mr. Chairman, and again, I appreciate everybody's participation.
I just want to add, Mr. Buna, Commissioner Harrington, Director Corey, thank you very much for coming in and bringing us up to date. I would echo Chair Hornstein's comments, and I would add that, at least from my standpoint, it would be my intention to put out a number of releases to the media, the newspapers, et cetera, in my district in hopes that, and I believe they will carry the information that there is a crunch time, and if you want to get on an airplane come October 1st and you intend to do it without a passport, you best get your application in now. So thank you very much for coming again, and with that, we are adjourned.
You know, I didn't do